Welcome to Step Up, a leadership podcast designed to help you grow personally, professionally, and spiritually. I'm your host, Dave Kinney. I'm joined by my pastor, Pastor Chris Kouba.
Hey, welcome to the Step Up podcast. This is super fun. I'm in a different seat here. Usually, if you're watching us on video, I'm over there, but I get to be the one doing some interviewing today with my good friend, Trent Dunham. In fact, if you subscribe to this episode, which I hope that you do, you will see right underneath the name Step Up, it will say Dunham Podcast Network. And this is the Dunham right here. This is the man. This is who he is. Trent, man, it's really good to have you on the podcast. You and I have got a lot of history and a long-term friendship. Yep. And man, this is honestly a lot of fun. It's always good if you're going to be on the Dunham Podcast Network to actually get the man himself in the studio and get some input. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Trent, and then I want to just fix anything that you say as it relates to that and talk a little bit about how you and I know each other. But tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us a little bit about your family, and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Good. I've been married to Jenna now we just celebrated 24 years of marriage. And
next year's a big one, by the way. Just
next
a reminder.
One. I'm already planning, right?
Okay.
It's wise. I have 3 kids. Jarrett's 18, Blake's 16, and Savannah's 14. And our family is very tight knit, and we do a lot together. So it's just it's sweet when you get to talk about your family in professional settings. My history as a family is really interesting. I don't know how much. I mean, you know some of it, but when you go back to the history of my extended family, if you look at what my father and grandfathers, it's really interesting how God has brought us into kind of a passion for ministry and how we have fulfilled that. So I think a bit of that background is pertinent. But so my grandfathers, both of my maternal and paternal grandfathers, are both elders at a church in Los Angeles called Church of the Open Door. And that church was pastored by a gentleman named J. Vernon McGee. So
greatness.
Dr. McGee.
Greatness. I'm a DTS guy.
There you go.
I love me some J. Vernon McGee, but anybody does. If you don't know him, you need to know who he is.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, he's probably reached more people posthumously through his radio broadcast through the Bible than he did even when he was alive. But it was a dynamic church, and he was a dynamic leader. And an interesting aside is as a function, one of the functions of one of my grandfathers being an elder, he took Dr. McGee golfing every Tuesday. So I've got a little photo
We'll just stop right here. Just FYI, if you want to do that to your pastor, I just want to encourage that in every way. Just throw it out there. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's wise. But I have a little photo on my desk of my grandfather on a bench, and then Dr. McGee on a tee box, just in like a tank top and slacks and suspenders. And I keep it on my desk because it just is a reminder that kind of we're all just kind of people. We're just dudes. Like,
so good.
Everyone, we're just guys or we're just gals. We're just living life. And so it kind of humanizes and it kind of demystifies some of those things. But the reality is we're all trying to do God's will in our life. And the relational aspects of that are so valuable. So my grandfathers were elders there at the church. My dad obviously grew up in the church, and my mom, they met in kindergarten, started dating when they were 14. And my dad wanted to be a pastor his whole life. Yeah. I wouldn't say his whole life, but later in his high school career, he wanted to be a pastor. And so Dr. McGee really encouraged him to go to Biola University, locally there in Los Angeles, to do his undergrad. So he did that. And then Dr. McGee, to your point, encouraged him to go to Dallas Seminary.
Yeah.
Because he's a big DTS guy. So my dad went to Dallas Seminary, got his master's in theology. I was born in Dallas he was in seminary there. Parents were married and living there. And during that time, he became the assistant to the president, who at the time was a gentleman named Dr. Walvard, John Walvard, who, if you're familiar with Dr. Walvard, very kind of like big end times, kind of a lot of knowledge and expertise in that kind of eschatology and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, Dr. Walvard put my dad in charge of fundraising, which my dad knew literally nothing about fundraising. And what ended up in that time, I mean, this was late 70s. We call it the rubber chicken circuit. They were just doing like little dinners around the country. And so the main speaker at those dinners was a gentleman named Chuck Swindoll. So my dad became close to Dr. Swindoll during that time. Yeah. And when Dr. Swindoll left Dallas Seminary and went to EV Fullerton in California to pastor that church, my dad went with him and became his first director of operations for Dr. Swindoll's radio program, which started at the time called Insight for Living. And so we have this kind of family history of media.
Yeah.
Think about Dr. McGee on radio. Think about Dr. Swindoll on radio. Over the years, my dad had a few different jobs in California. Eventually went into consulting and helped launch Dr. Adrian Rogers' Love Worth Finding on radio, helped launch Dr. or Chip Ingram on his radio program. Like, this is like this history of how do we take good Bible teaching and the spread of the gospel and leverage media platforms for the benefit of that. And back then, a lot of that was through radio. And so we kind of have this family history. I like to tell that story just because it gives people kind of a context for. And then Trent comes along, and what is Trent going to do? Because his grandfathers and his dad did so much. How can you possibly follow that up? Like, how do you carry that legacy forward? Well, I went to Wheaton College. I was really wanted to be a youth pastor when I graduated. So kind of went through that track. Was a youth pastor the first year and a half out of college when Jenna and I were married and young, and enjoyed it, but really felt, you don't tell this story too often, really felt a call out of ministry. Just felt like God was saying, your time here, your season here is done. So I was about to start seminary and higher education related to that and dive more deeply into ministry, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I didn't know if he wanted me to go into corporate real estate or what. But my dad at the time was leading a company, a consulting firm that helped Christian nonprofits out with marketing and fundraising and stuff like that. And so he's like, just come work for me for a while till you figure out what you want to do. And as I got into that, a real passion developed for using my business skills and the gifts God had given me there, but my deep passion for ministry. And so those things married. Today, I'm the president and CEO of an organization called Dunham+Company. My dad founded it in 2002. I joined him a month later. So we've been doing that together since then. About 2 years ago, he transitioned out of the leadership role and is now kind of founder and chairman of the organization. Still involved, but in a much different season of his career. And is it a sweet time for us as he has done a really, really good job of empowering me and letting me lead. And so just for context of what Dunham+Company does, yes, marketing and fundraising, but we spend a lot of time in branding and media as well. And we have an office in Dallas, Texas, and we have one in Sydney, Australia. And so God's really blessed us with the opportunity to support ministries around the world in what God has called them uniquely to do. And this podcast is evidence of that. So over the years, we've developed a podcast network. We've got so many ministries that we work with that are developing content. And it's a great example, Chris, of how you and your ministry are just taking the thing God's put on your heart and that has given you a vision for, and we're just coming alongside. We're going to come behind you and say, like, how do we just kind of clear the way for you? How do we make that more possible, more frequent? How do we reach more people in the context in which God's called you to and what your ministry is focused on? So it's just a privilege to even sit here. I know you're going to go through our personal history a bit, and that's got a lot of funny stuff in and of itself.
Yeah, let's just be clear. Okay, let's just stop for a second, because I mean, Trent is a big deal. I want to make that super, super clear. He is, but here's how Trent and I actually got to know each other, okay? It's whenever I was working for the man and he was working for the man, and we would get together to talk about what it's like working for the man, right? That's pretty much what it was about to. Yeah. And our kids are, so I've got 4, and they're basically just kind of staggered. I think we've got one of ours that overlap, but pretty much staggered from you guys. And Hillary and Jenna are friends. And so we knew them really early on because I was teaching a young marrieds class. And here comes Trent and Jenna kind of popping in there, and he's just throwing out names right and left. Like, y'all know this guy and this guy and this guy. I'm like, who is this guy? So we sit down and realize what he does, and we just became friends. Yeah. I mean, it just became just a genuine friendship, and our families and all that kind of stuff, just being able to sort of run with each other. A couple episodes I talked about the type of friends every man should have, and one of the things I said was that a man should have someone that he's accountable with, not just accountable to. Accountable to is definitely important, but you want to find a guy who's running hard in the same direction that you are, and then just naturally be accountable. And that you've been that guy. Yeah. I mean, you've been that for me, and so it's funny. Now I'm the man, and you're the man, and so now everybody's talking about us, what it's like working for the man. But it's just we have a different, unique relationship now from a business standpoint. Obviously, you know, we're a client of y'all's and glad to be that and all of that. But I want to not talk about any of that work stuff.
Amen.
Because I know what you're actually thinking about most right now. And that's the fact that at the time of this recording, your oldest is about to go off to college in a matter of weeks.
Correct.
And first of all, I just want to say I'm really glad that you're doing this first and that I'm able to be behind you. I'm about a year behind you. But man, it's just kind of fun watching it a little bit. And just because I know the relationship you've got with your son, Jared, and just the fact that you're kind of in a mess. I mean, you've sort of
it's new.
Walk us through this. Like, this is fresh. I'm pulling a fresh wound here. Like, tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, man. It's good. And God gives us seasons, right? And I think oftentimes when you're in the season, it's hard to pull out and kind of look at this being a season of life that it has its own unique kind of circumstances, but then opportunities, blessings, challenges, and oftentimes people ask me, like, what's it like? Do you wish Jarrett was small again? Like a kid. And you know what? I honestly can say I've enjoyed every phase of his childhood. Everyone's gotten better.
Yeah.
And we're in a very sweet phase right now. And so what I mean by that is we just do a lot together. Yeah. He developed a passion maybe 3 or 4 years ago for golf. And so I was like a once or twice a year player at that point.
I played with you back then. You were rough. It was bad.
I embraced that.
Yeah.
I own that. But he got real passionate about it. And so it just became a thing that I'm like, okay, well, I mean, let's roll. So over the years, we've played a lot together. We play all the time together. And it's a very practical outcome example of how our relationship has just developed. And so this season is particularly sweet because we have spent a good amount of time together. Yeah. And that relationship, there's a lot of those things, as you know, with your kids in the relationship that just, you don't have to say a word. You can just being there.
Like being around.
Yeah. And so it's been a fun season. I think the wrestle in the season is, man, there's this I just saw Inside Out 2 with my family.
Okay.
If we're talking about emotions, it's the confluence and the collision of all these emotions coming together at once. And very much that's the case because, man, am I wickedly proud of this.
There's no question.
Of this man.
I've heard that probably the most from you. You just kind of talk about it. I mean, it's kind of fun just to see you. You can tell you're going to miss him like crazy just because you're so proud of him. And he's a great kid doing some great things, going to have a great future, headed off to Baylor. So he's already a leader. He's just got leadership all over him. But I mean, walk me through like what you're thinking as you're about to head into this new season, because it's going to be different, but you also don't know what to expect.
Correct.
Right? I mean,
no, absolutely. Especially when you have your first one going off, there's all those kind of unknowns. Like, what's the dynamic going to be like for the four of us that are back at home when he's gone? What's the dynamic when he comes back from for a vacation and tries to reintegrate into family for a season? What's it going to be like? What's our communication going to be like? And really having to defer to him on what he wants that to be, and really how do we give him the freedom to become the man that God intends him to be. So there's the proud emotions, there's the sad emotions for the season of like, there's many things I love about the time we get right now that I don't want to see end. But there's the excitement as well. There's this, I'm really pumped for what this next season has for him because I know that he has all the tools.
Yeah.
And I, as a parent, you're obviously, when your kid goes away to college, you're praying for they find a good church and they find a good friend group and they get plugged in to whatever God has for them community-wise that really will help shape and develop him for as he's deployed even beyond that. And I think in that wrestle, in those prayers and those thoughts, is just there's a lot of even reflection. If I was to use a word of what this season has been like, I'm not a very sentimental person. I mean, you know me well. But I've been super reflective in this season.
The last multiple conversations you and I've had, I've been like, dude, what is wrong with Trent? He's getting all like you're not getting teary, but you're flirting with
Sappy.
it. Like you're kind of doing that. We did get to play golf though recently, and it has upped your golf game. I will say that, Jarrett. I appreciate the fact that you helped your dad with that. His interest and skill has gone up tremendously. Okay, but let's just stop for a second. Because you're right, a lot of times life just happens so fast. you don't get a time to kind of maybe stop and reflect. So I'm going to ask you to maybe do that. What do you look back now that Jarrett's about to be out of the nest, if you will, and you would say, man, I am so glad I did this?
Sure. So there's a couple things, but if I was to say what is one thing that I kind of backed into, I didn't know when it started, but once I realized, I doubled down on.
Okay.
Is because he's the oldest. When he was 6 years old, we just did a dad and son trip. And
every year, or just that one time?
We did it when he was 6, and then every I kind of rotated throughout the kids after that.
Okay.
And I don't know, it kind of just created its life of its own. But essentially, we did a handful of father-son trips, and then at one point, we did a couple of trips where it was just Jenna and I and him.
Yeah.
And I don't think it matters at all what you do, where you go.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, and a lot of times we would just be like, what do you want to do? The contiguous 48 states are your playground.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go? And it's so fun to see him pick the destination, talk about what he wants to do. Like, he's a planner, so he would want to plan more. My second son is, where are we today?
Yeah.
I'm just going to have fun right now.
He's a middle child. He's just in every way. Yeah,
yes.
That's fun.
So, but it was fun because just that quality time in the midst of the chaos, because it is chaos. I mean, you're raising 4 kids. There's a million things they're involved in, and we have jobs, and life is fast, and so being able to detach from normal life for a brief period of time, whether that's a long weekend or a full week, like that in and of itself, it enabled conversations to happen that otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah.
It helped me process with him some things that were going on in his world. It helped me learn what would be appropriate to share with my son that even as a dad or as a leader I'm going through, and begin to communicate in age-appropriate ways of just like, things that he could understand that were maybe a challenge for the family or for us or in business and stuff like that. And so I think it afforded us that time you just can't replace. And I didn't try to make it like we're going to just study the Bible all week, but I think you find those moments like, hey, I have these conversations I want to have throughout our time together. And so when you'll know, like, hey, we're at a meal right now, and like this is the time, or we're at the end of the day, and this is the time to have that convo. And I think just being strategic in that way was huge for us.
I just think through our relationship, we hung out a lot more, obviously, whenever I was in Dallas and you were, but we were in a season where both of us were just in a grind.
Yep.
I mean, you traveled a ton. I remember talking about that. A lot of our conversations were about like, how do I navigate marriage and how do I navigate parenting, stuff like that. Ministry is kind of always on. There's never a really time off, that kind of a thing. One of the things I've always appreciated about you, and even hearing you say it looking back, one, I want to point this out. You're not talking about all those times whenever you were in the grind and whatever else.
Right.
You're talking about those memories that you intentionally set aside time to make.
Yes.
And you've always been really, really good about being intentional about like, okay, when I am home, I'm going to make sure that I'm actually home, as opposed to, because I mean, you were literally gone a lot. I mean, it was part of the nature of your job and stuff like that. And so I just want to encourage men that are out there, like, I guess one takeaway would be schedule it. Like, just put it on the calendar. I mean, what you're just saying right there, where, you had a lot of points and a lot of whatever, so you got to do a lot of cool stuff.
Right.
You may not have the ability to do all of that, but I'm telling you, Jarrett's not going to talk about all the things Dad didn't do. He's going to talk about instead those trips and those experiences, and you are too. I mean, they're fresh on your mind, and they're fresh in whatever. And so just men know you're going to be better off by doing this, and your kid's going to also benefit greatly by you just being able to do it. And so you just got to be intentional with the time that you do have. What would you look back and you would say, man, if I had to do over, knowing what I know now, I'd have probably done this different?
Yeah. I think you mentioned it. I think one of the main things is I'm not sure I needed to travel that much, to be honest with you.
That was always the wrestle. You and I had that conversation so many times.
Amen. And it's born out of a desire to serve well.
Yeah. Well, you were good at what you were doing. So I mean, it was success and all of that. So,
but it's also born out of a desire because I'm an achiever, right?
Yeah.
And so an achiever is I would just go the extra mile or want to make sure that kind of like that leave no doubt. I played football in college, and so you kind of have this mentality, this on-off switch. It's like when you're in the game, it's like the switch is on.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I would approach work that way of just like, I want to deliver the best. I want, so I'm not afraid to make a sacrifice. But I think at times there would have been wisdom in maybe saying, I don't actually need to go on that trip, or I could do that at a different time. We try to prioritize calendar and stuff like that, but there's just, you can't avoid missing events that your kid are experiencing when you travel as much as I did. And I think that's one thing that I would say, and as an encouragement to you if you're listening, is if you have things in your professional life like heavy travel or lots of business dinners or just things that demand on you, I think it's a worthwhile self-evaluation on a more frequent basis to say, is that really worth the investment for my kids and my marriage? So I think that's one thing for sure. I think the other thing is, I wish, like, faith is a part of our family. Like, there's nothing, you can't have a conversation, a decision point. Like, it's just who we are.
Sure.
We do church together. We do life with Jesus together. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I wish I maybe would have doubled down on is sharing more of my experiences with Jesus with him more frequently. And what I mean by that is, when I went through this, Jesus showed up in this way.
Yeah, that's good.
When I was struggling with this, Jesus walked me through that in this way. I've begun to do that a bit more, but I wish I would have made that more of the conversation and just found ways to integrate that into our life more naturally throughout his entire upbringing rather than just starting later. But,
Yeah, it's easy to assume.
Yeah,
right?
It is.
And it's also easy to assume they know about your faith as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's powerful just to think through that. Okay, let's talk through this just for a second. Maybe the last question here is just our friendship.
Yeah.
And just the fact that, you showed up, first thing you did whenever you saw me was, dude, we got a lot to talk about at lunch, which usually means you got something that you need to think through, right?
Yeah.
You already know I've got stuff I want to talk to you about. And that's just kind of always been the nature of our relationship. It's even been, I think, strengthened in some sense since the fact that we've been apart, just because we're able to kind of come together. And I know enough about your world that I can kind of speak into that. Mm-hmm. You know enough about my world that you can kind of speak into that. We know our wives, so we know kind of whenever you're faking it and when doing whatever else. And we kind of know the dynamics. And so I just look back and let me just say publicly, I'm really grateful for that, and just grateful for the friendship and the fact that we can just kind of pick up and we can go straight there and feel like it's a safe confidant. I just also know how many guys don't have this.
Amen.
And I think I'm realizing that more and more as we kind of get into this. And why do you think it's so important just to have somebody that you can be like, dude, let me tell you about this, that you can process with, that you can also know that they'll kind of say, hey, bro, are you sure about that? Or push you, help you, all the various things, pray for you, you've been all of those things. Why do you think it's so important for this kind of relationship to have for a man?
It's huge. As men, I would say this, even in our American culture, as men, the pride of independence, and I'm using those words intentionally, the pride of independence, like I've got this thing, is such an inhibitor, I believe, to really God having full purview of your life and doing what he wants to do in it and through it.
It's really good.
And the vulnerability that you're forced to have that leads to humility in conversations and relationships. God works like the super highway to productivity in kind of our man nomenclature. In our life, oftentimes the super highway is humility. Like, God uses humility in ways that you could not imagine.
Yeah.
And how do you stay humble if you live in an echo chamber?
Yeah.
And so relationships like this are great. Number one, because you help process, hey, am I thinking about this right? That's invaluable.
Sure.
In every aspect of life, not just business, not just family, but every aspect of life, to have wise, godly counsel. Yeah. Obviously, in God's word, kind of living that every day, but to have someone that can affirm or challenge the things that you're wrestling with is irreplaceable. And I want to reiterate, when you are in a healthy relationship with someone who can call your bluff, with someone who knows what you wrestle with, what some of those struggles are, you will get pressed in a really healthy way.
Yeah.
And that pressure, I do believe, in a godly heart creates a humble approach to say, okay, look, maybe a gift of mine is leadership, but that gift does not mean I know everything about leadership. And so I have to approach that with some humility that says, I'm willing to continue to learn. Humility also is like coupled with a voraciousness for learning.
Yeah.
Because you just want to be better.
For sure.
So I think the value of those relationships are, in many ways, the value is innumerable in what it does for you personally, but what it does for your family. Because think about the concentric circles or the ripple effect on your entire community that you influence or interact with if you're healthy.
Sure.
As a father, as a husband, as a leader, as a friend, and you can be way more healthy. You can be healthier if you're in those kind of healthy relationships that allow you to get pressed. And so I know maybe a wordy way to say it, but one of the gifts that I think a friendship like ours has given me is just a humility to not think that I've got it wired or that I'm all this stuff, because I'm not.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I really appreciate and love and hope the case for anybody maybe listening, we're probably going to talk some shop, just work stuff with you, work stuff with me. I'm kind of wrestling through this. What do you think? We're going to talk family stuff.
Yep.
We're going to be able to talk. And I think there's just this ability to have someone who is, it doesn't mean we're like walking through a list.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's instead just more natural. We're both running in the same direction, both hard, and being like, hey, what are you learning from? What do you see in this? And I mean, there's not a conversation that I don't go walk away from that I don't feel like I've either got a resource, a book, or some kind of thing that I want to do better at or whatever. And I don't think either one of us probably went into the conversation expecting to share wisdom. It's just more of
life.
Kind of a natural, normal thing. And so I just want to encourage you, find it. I think what's important is that our positions now, because our recline of y'all's and gladly, like we're naturally going to do that, but we did this back whenever we weren't.
Right. That's right.
We did this years and 20 years ago.
I'll never forget our first, I hadn't met you. We had come to Prestonwood as a new young couple, and I felt God saying, like, you need an outlet for kind of that pastoral thing that I wired you with, and over time that turned into me teaching an adult class there for a long season. And that first breakfast, I'll never forget it, at La Peep with you, just kind of talking through, like, who are you? What are you doing? What are you passionate about? What's your history? Why are you here? But just your encouragement to just stay in the game. Yeah. From day one, that was almost like the thread, common thread that permeated all of our conversations, and just doing life together is just like, stay in the game. And I love that we're 20 years later almost, and what God has done is we have just committed to stay in the game. Yeah.
That's
awesome.
Good. That's good. And I'm just, again, super grateful that you're 1 year ahead of me on this Baylor stuff. So I think that's where I'm headed here in about a year. So I'll be taking a bunch of notes. Trent, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for hosting the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being a part of it. Make sure to follow Trent. Tell him about your podcast. You've got one?
So I've got actually two podcasts. We have one called Cause and Effect, and that is a podcast that if you're in the nonprofit sector or the church, parachurch organization, we just kind of talk about what's happening in that landscape from research and trends and things like that. And then I have another podcast called Decisions, and we talk to leaders who really face decision points in their careers or in their life that God's used to drive them in different directions. And so, check either one of those out.
Yeah, they're both great. I want to highly encourage you to subscribe, like those. Make sure to do the same thing for the Step Up Podcast. Trent, thanks again for being here. You guys have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Step Up Podcast. Do us a favor and subscribe, and share this episode to help us get the word out. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment and even leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. For additional information or to reach out directly, please visit chriskouba.com. That's chriskouba.com. You can follow Pastor Chris on social media and just search Chris Kouba, Kouba. You can also follow United City Church on all socials at United City Church. That's UNTD City Church. Thanks so much.